Hey there, I thought it might be helpful if I walked you through at least what I'm seeing on my end for where you go for question help and for the example that they give you, and then see if maybe me breaking down the example helps to make it a little more clear. So if you go up here to question help, there's a few different options. Obviously, I don't have to ask my instructor, but I do have right here view an example, which I believe you should have as well. So I'm going to click on that view example, and then I am going to enlarge it a little bit here. And it kind of like goes through the steps for you. So it says, the 6 people were asked to determine the amount of money they were carrying. It asks you first to determine the range and standard deviation. So if you hit continue, it'll show you the first step. And as they say here, to find the range of a set of data, you subtract the lowest value from the highest value. So if you're looking at that list of numbers, which I realized this didn't sound like this was your problem, but just so you can see how the example kind of works out. So obviously the biggest one is 63, the smallest one is 2, so the range is 61. And if I take my writing off, hit the continue button, you can see they kind of list you out the steps. Highest number is 63, lowest is 2, so 63 minus 2 is 61. So they walk you through that first step. Then if you can continue again, it'll show you the formula for standard deviation. And some of this symbolic stuff can be a little tricky sometimes. So first of all, the mean, that little symbol, the X with the line over it is the symbol for the mean, is the first thing that you need to figure out standard deviation. It actually takes quite a few steps to figure out standard deviation, but the first step is to find the mean. And it didn't sound like you were having an issue from the previous lessons for finding out the mean. So I'm going to kind of breeze through that part because it says obviously sigma, that just means sum all the data together. So in other words, you're just going to add all the numbers together and then divide by however many numbers you have. So if I take my writing off the screen here and hit continue, you'll see that they add all the numbers together for you and get that 174. And then if you hit continue again, they'll do the 174 divided by 6 because there were 6 numbers in the data set. So the mean is 29. Again, it didn't sound like you were having a hard time finding the mean, but I just wanted to show you that one of the first steps to finding the standard deviation is that you need the mean of the set of data. And these are the steps that they're walking you through in that example, again, that I clicked on up there back in question help up at the top. So if I hit continue again, it'll start walking you through the next steps. So I'm going to kind of black this out for a minute. So we've got the mean. We know that the mean is 29. So now let's look at this chart and see if this can help you to make sense of it. So when you're finding standard deviation, basically what you're doing is you're trying to figure out exactly like how spread apart the data are. So how far away the individual pieces of data are from the mean. So this part of the formula right here, X minus the mean, means that you're literally just going to take this number, so like in this case 29, and you're going to subtract it from the mean. So 29 minus 29, and you would get obviously 0. Sorry, I realized I didn't really give myself enough room to write there. Then for the second part of the chart, of course, you would do 63 minus 29, and you would get 34. So for this entire column, all you're doing is you're taking the number in the first column and you're subtracting the mean. So you will see if you hit continue, I'm getting ready to click the continue button again. I know you can't see my mouse clicks, but I'm clicking continue again. And you'll see that in the next step, now they have done that for you. They've shown you what you get if you do the number X and you subtract the mean. So there's all those differences. Obviously, some of them turn out to be negative numbers because, for example, in this case, 11 is smaller than the mean. So obviously 11 minus 29 is going to give you a negative number. Okay, 28 minus 29 gives you that negative 1. 2 minus 29 obviously gives you that negative 27. And 41 minus 29 is where you got that 12. So again, the middle column they just got by doing each individual set of data and subtracting that mean that you got in the previous step. Then what they're asking for in the next column is to take the sum that you got in this previous column, so x minus the mean, and to square it. And I'm sure that you already know that when you're squaring a number, it means you're multiplying that number by itself twice. So 0 times 0 obviously is 0. In the next column, 34 times 34 is 1,156. In the next column, negative 18 times negative 18, a negative times a negative is a positive, so that's going to be 324. So that is how they're getting all the pieces of data in the third column. So now let me take my writing away. I'm going to click the continue button so that you can see that's where they got all of their numbers from. That's where all the numbers in the third column came from. So they took the original piece of data, subtracted it from the mean to get this column, and then squared that number to get everything that is in this third column here. So now I'm going to hit continue again. And what it says determine the sum of the values in the x minus the mean squared column. So you're going to add together all of these numbers because of course that's what the sum means. So that's what they're showing you here, is that you added all of those numbers together. And then if I click continue again, the rest of the formula for mean, it's a little, for standard deviation, it's a little bit different from the mean. When you're finding the mean, you're dividing by, like, so for in the example in the previous steps, you took all of the 6 numbers and you divided by 6 because you had 6 numbers in the data set. You added them together to get 174, and then you divided by 6. When you find the standard deviation of a set of data, you actually divide by 1 number fewer than you have in the data set. That's what they mean by n minus 1. So that if you take that 2354, which again we got from adding up all the numbers in this column, now we're going to divide it by 5, as you can see they've done for you here. So that is where they get 470.8. So I will hit continue again. Oops. Maybe it'll work. There we go. And finally, the last step. I know it is a lot of steps to get the standard deviation. So after you have summed up all the numbers in that column, divided by 1 fewer than the numbers you have in the data set, then finally you have to take the square root of that number. If you don't remember how to find the square root, it's technically what number times itself gives you that number. Obviously, it's a decimal, but any standard scientific calculator will do that for you. So we arrive at the number 21.70. So I hit continue, and they say, thus, the standard deviation of these amounts of money is $21.70. So that is the example that the text gave you, where, again, we clicked on question help up at the top right. Let me show you that again. Question help, and then, oh, well, the option's gone because we're actually in the example right now. Let me close the example. So you go to question help, view an example, and that's where we got all of those steps that we just went through in order to figure out the standard deviation. So what might be helpful is if I were you, maybe go ahead and like pause this video right now, because what I'm going to do is, since the computer already gave you the answer for the standard deviation, if you want to try to go back through those steps that I just showed you, either rewind the video and watch again, or maybe you're taking notes, try those steps on your own, and I am going to go ahead and work that for you on here, since it's already given you the answer anyway. But if I were you, I would try it first, and then while the video is paused, and then you restart the video and see whether or not you've got the right answer. Alrighty, so let's talk about where they got this answer that they put for standard deviation very quickly. So remember that your first step is that you need to find the mean of the set of data. And in order to do that, you need to add all of those numbers together. If I add all those numbers together, I get 192. And then if I divide by the 6 numbers that are in the data set, I get 32. Then the next step is to make that little chart. I'm going to put all the data pieces here. And then remember, your next step is that you have to take the number and subtract it from the mean. So if I do 30 minus 32, I got -2. So then, once you found the difference between the number in the data set and the mean, then you have to take that difference and square it to get the third column. So I'm going to do those very quickly. So 2 squared, of course, is 4. 28 squared is 784. -19 times -19 is 361. -6 times -6 is 36. -28 times -28 is 784, the same way that +28 times +28 is 784. And 27 times 27 is 729. So now that we've got all 6 of those numbers, and again, I got that by squaring the previous column. I'm going to sum all of those numbers together, just going to add them together, and I get 2,698. And remember that when you're doing standard deviation, you don't divide by the number of numbers in the data set. Earlier we divided by 6 because there were 6 numbers, but you actually divide by what's called n-1, so 1 fewer than the numbers you have in the data set, which means I'm going to divide it by 5. And that gives me 539.6. And last but not least, you need to square root 539.6. And if you do that, you get a pretty crazy decimal. That's what happens anytime you find the square root of a number that is not a perfect square. It comes out to be 23.229, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, which is why the book just rounds it, because we're talking about money. You round it to that decimal place, so that's why they rounded it to $23.23. So hopefully that helps you a little bit more on how to find standard deviation. Please let me know if you need a little bit more help.